I wanted to talk a little bit about who is an eligible citizen and non-citizen. Our citizens are citizens by birth or naturalized. A permanent U.S. resident is also an eligible non-citizen. And then these various categories also qualify as an eligible non-citizen. These have to be granted statuses. So if a student has a refugee status, an asylee granted status, if the student is a Cuban Haitian entrant, could have a status pending on that particular one. A conditional entrant, victims of human trafficking that hold a T visa or a parolee, those are students who would qualify as eligible non-citizens for purposes of being eligible for federally funded student aid. So after the student has completed all sections of the FAFSA to include their demographic and financial information, the student will then invite their contributor to the FAFSA. A contributor could be the student's parents when we're talking about a dependent student. If a student is married, their contributor could be their spouse. And so they would then send the information to their contributor, and I will show you that in a few slides. I did want to highlight that if a student's parent is divorced, separated, or otherwise unmarried, we do have to make sure that we are providing the appropriate contributor on the FAFSA. For the purpose of the FAFSA, parents are either biological or adoptive parents. The contributing parent is the parent who provides the most support. And if the contributing parent is remarried, step-parent information is required. So once the student has gotten to the end of their section, this is where they'll be asked to provide the Social Security number, email address, and date of birth for the contributing parent. In the event that the parent does not have a Social Security number, there is a checkbox that allows the student to select that. Once the student has shared that information, the contributor, the parent, will receive an email, and that email is going to let the parent know that their student has completed their section and that their information is now required in order for the continued processing of the student's FAFSA. With that, I do want to make note that the FAFSA will remain available for completion for 45 days. After 45 days, the FAFSA will be deleted and the student will need to start the process all over again. So it's really important for parents to act expeditiously on the email that they receive to ensure that the FAFSA does not get deleted. I want to talk a little bit about granting consent and what that means, because this is new for 24-25. As I mentioned before, all contributors must grant consent for the FAFSA to be submitted and analyzed. If consent is not granted, an SAI will not be generated. Consent allows a contributor to retrieve and disclose their federal tax information. I do want to make note, again, even if they are a non-tax filer, they must grant consent. And then must be submitted for the student to qualify for federally funded student aid. Without it, we do not get that student aid index. FAFSA has done a really great job of outlining what consent is and why the contributor is granting consent, and I'm not going to read this in its entirety. I just wanted to share with you what the contributors are seeing before consent is granted, and then after they read through this, they then approve consent in order to move forward with the FAFSA. So from there, the student gets information that tells them about their next steps. And essentially, in the future, they will get their FAFSA submission summary. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. I also wanted to make note that for our students who have unique and special circumstances, and I'll talk about those in a moment, in the past, when a student was deemed homeless, or if a dependency override decision was granted, meaning that a student could not answer the dependency questions on the FAFSA as yes, but the student had an unusual circumstance in which their dependency was overridden to independent, the student had to do these processes annually. Each and every year they had to say, this is still my situation. With the FAFSA simplification, that is no longer the case. A student no longer has to do that annual submission of additional documentation. The previous year's status can roll over. I wanted to highlight special and unusual circumstances and tell you all about when the school has the opportunity to look at a student's situation on a case-by-case basis. A special circumstance occurs when a student has a situation and that situation is not reflected on the FAFSA. So as we discussed previously, the current FAFSA, the 24-25, so the FAFSA for next year, is using 2022 tax information. It is possible that since 2022, that family situation has changed. In those instances, this is where a financial aid office can exercise professional judgment based on a special circumstance. These special circumstances can include loss of employment or income, death of a parent or a spouse, unusual medical expenses, and other items. But these are some of the more common ones that we see. These processes are unique to the institution the student is attending. So it is really important that if a student does have a special circumstance, that that student finds out what that process is at that particular institution so that the student can follow that institution's processes to start their professional judgment process at that particular school. There are also times when the student's dependency information on the FAFSA may not reflect the student's unique circumstance, and we refer to these as unusual circumstances. And unusual circumstances can result in what we refer to as dependency overrides in financial aid. I see these most often when a student may reside with a family member who is not their adoptive or biological parent due to a unique family circumstance. That person never adopted them, but they're not in a legal guardianship per se. We see situations like that. We also see situations where the student has been abandoned or abused or otherwise neglected, and it is not a safe space for that student to reach out to their parent to get FAFSA information. And so these are situations, again, where each school has their own process. So it's important for the student to know that school's process in order to navigate that. So FAFSA simplification in practice. I will share that I have done a couple high school nights now, and many students and families have a quicker FAFSA submission experience because they aren't inputting that tax information. And so it makes it a little more streamlined. However, I will be very transparent in that the Department of Education is aware and is monitoring a variety of FAFSA submission challenges and resolving known issues. And so there is a running list of various challenges that students and families may be experiencing as they are navigating FAFSA submissions. Also, at the post-secondary institutions, we will receive what we refer to as the ISER, the Institutional Student Information Record, which is our output of the information provided on the FAFSA that we utilize to determine a student's financial aid package, that we utilize to determine students' eligibility, that we utilize to know that student's eligibility for federally funded student aid. This information is incredibly important to the functioning of the Office of Student Financial Assistance. We have learned that we will not begin to receive those institutional student information records until sometime in the first half of March is when we'll begin to receive those. That's important information for you all to know as guidance counselors, because this is going to impact our processing timelines as financial aid offices for the 24-25 years. It is going to impact our ability to get out financial aid summaries or award notifications in the time frame in which we normally do. And so we are in a new year with new challenges, and we're navigating the challenges best we can. I think what's important is that we're very communicative with our student bodies and our student populations, with our outside partners, such as our K-12 partners, and sharing that this year is different. And so you will receive, or our students will be receiving information on a different timeline as they did in the past. I will share that I've heard some students who've gotten their SAI on the spot and they saw that. However, the FAFSA submission summary, or the FSS, has not been sent. That is going to be sent around the same time that we start to get those ISER records. I've also heard some students who got all the way to the end and they did not necessarily see their SAI. So there's some quirky things happening. I just want to be very transparent. But in March, once those FAFSA submission summaries get sent, students will be able to see their calculated student aid index and utilize that to have some, at least a barometer of what their aid eligibility may be. And as I mentioned, award notification, financial aid summaries, the timelines are going to definitely be impacted as we are looking at getting information much later than we typically do in order to develop and construct students' financial aid packages. All right, so I said a lot about FAFSA simplification and a lot about the financial aid application process for the FAFSA. I want to talk a little bit about what type of aid is available to assist students and families once the FAFSA is completed. And so for our intents and purposes, we like to divide financial aid into two categories. It's gift aid. Gift aid is free money given to students to assist with their educational expenses. It comes in the form of grants or scholarships. Grant eligibility, students do not have much dominion over their grant eligibility. Their grant eligibility is going to be based on the information provided on the FAFSA for most institutions. Some of our private institutions also have a private application, or they might utilize the CSS profile to determine a student's grant eligibility for institutional grants. But grant eligibility is a space where students don't necessarily have much dominion over what their grant eligibility will look like. Scholarships, I like to say that's where the ball is in the student's court. I encourage students to look for as many scholarships as possible and look for scholarships regularly and apply for any and all scholarships for which the students meet the criteria. The other category of financial aid is what we refer to as self-help. Self-help comes in the form of aid that is either earned, such as federal work study, where a student earns a biweekly paycheck as a part of their financial aid package, or federally funded student loans, as we all know, that require repayment. Scholarships come from a variety of different sources. Institutional scholarships are offered to students from the post-secondary institution that the student is attending. I will share that when it comes to institutional scholarships, each school may have their own process. This is another space that I always encourage students to learn about the process at their institution so they can find out how they are considered for institutional scholarships. There are also community-based scholarships. I like to think of our religious groups, fraternities, sororities, community-based organizations, just opportunities for students to potentially tap into resources that are readily available in their respective communities. And then each school has a foundation, and that foundation does secure donor scholarships. It's another space where students want to find out how they tap into that school's foundation awards. Different schools have different processes for that. And then we have our state scholarships, most commonly Bright Futures. So I'll get into a little bit about Bright Futures. And then I share just some spaces where students can find scholarships. I will share that some of these spaces will inundate the students with emails. But in those emails, they may find some scholarships for which they meet the criteria and give them an opportunity to increase their gift aid portfolio. And then each school typically has a space somewhere on their financial aid website that lists a variety of different scholarships available at that particular institution. So talk a little bit about Bright Futures. Bright Futures, again, is our state-funded program. It is divided into two categories at the state university systems. We take the Academic Scholars Award and the Medallion Scholars Award. The Academic Scholars Award is 100% of the cost per credit hour as at our state university systems. Bright Futures is funded for 120 credit hours. Summer funding is available. I always like to make note that Bright Futures is not a full-time award. It requires 6 credit hours of enrollment per semester, and that includes in the summer term. The exception to that is the student's graduating term. When it comes to the Medallion Scholars is very similar. The major difference is that at the state university systems, the Medallion Scholar currently covers 75% of the cost per credit hour, and currently it covers 100% of the cost per credit hour if our students are attending a Florida college. And so I'm sure you all are intimately familiar with what a student has to do in order to qualify for Bright Futures. So I'm not going to go over all of the qualifications. I do want to make note of a few things. I want to make note of the volunteer hours and the paid work hours. There is some flexibility in the volunteer hours for students to qualify. They can substitute those volunteer hours or combine those volunteer hours with paid work hours. Additionally, I want to talk about the CLT. The CLT is a new standardized test that's being utilized to determine a student's eligibility for the Bright Futures Award. As you can see here, you can see the scores needed in order for a student to qualify for the top tier of the award, which is the Academic Scholars Award. The student would have to have either a 29 on the ACT, a 1340 on the SAT, or a 96 on the CLT. And then for our Medallion Award, the student would have to have a 25 on the ACT, a 1210 on the SAT, or an 84 on the CLT. So I just wanted to highlight those items as we're looking at students who are now able to qualify with a new test. And then while the Florida Bright Futures Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship is not accepted at state universities, it is accepted at technical schools and some of the programs at our Florida college system schools. And so I wanted to make sure that I shared the requirements there. Those are slightly different than our Medallion and our academic awards. And students do have to have that career and technical educational program, at least 3 credits, in order to be considered for the Florida Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship. As I'm sure all of you know, in order to be considered for Bright Futures, there is an application beyond the FAFSA. The FAFSA is not required for Bright Futures. However, students must complete the Florida Financial Aid application. The Florida Financial Aid application can be completed on the Florida Department of Education's OSFA website. The student will log in, complete that application, and that application is required for that student's eligibility for Bright Futures to be considered. So I'm coming to the end of what I have to present here, but I do want to open up the floor for, I know there's some questions in the Q&A section and that we want to make sure that we answer for the group. I do recognize that what I shared today has a lot of change, and I know that it's human nature to be a little bit resistant to change. So I just wanted to share a quote. I love quotes. So I'm sharing: the secret of change is to focus all your energy on not fighting the old, but building the new. And that's a quote from Socrates. And we're building a whole new FAFSA process. It has been deemed Better FAFSA, Better Future. We are in the infancy stages of this change, and with any change comes some growing pains. But with that, ultimately, I want to go back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation, which is the purpose and the intention of FAFSA simplification is to demystify the financial aid process for our students and families, to ultimately streamline the application process for our students and families, and to then give our students and families the opportunity for more eligibility for aid. And so we're making progress. It is a work in progress, and we're working towards all of those things. With that, I am going to open up the floor for questions that we may want to answer in the general platform. I am going to stop my share and go from there.
Thank you. Yes, if you guys have any questions, put them in the Q&A. We will try to answer as many as we can. Damien, do you have one lined up or anything ready to ask Karima? So I guess I'll start off with this one for counselors. Is there a way that they can access what the student sees when they're creating a FAFSA account step by step, just so they can advise the students better with that process as well?
Sure. So what we advise our team to do is, if you haven't already done so, to create one on your own. And so then that way you can log in and see what the FSA ID process looks like. There also is some information available on a FAFSA walkthrough, where you can see some of what the student would see in the process. And I think we should be able to probably provide a link to the FAFSA walkthrough information. But if you haven't created your own FSA ID, you can do so. We also have our team members submitting the FAFSA, just so that they can get a feel for what that process looks like for students and families. And so that's an opportunity to just kind of get a hands-on experience as to what the process looks like.
Wonderful. Along with the parents and getting them involved in completing the FAFSA, if some parents may be a little reluctant to fill it out, or not too sure about what they should do on their end, how can counselors kind of get them on track and get them involved with completing this for their student and ensuring that it's something that's going to benefit them in the end?
Sure. I know that depending on a variety of reasons, there are some parents who are reluctant to move forward with the FAFSA process. I think what it's important for parents to know is that completing the FAFSA does not obligate them to any financial support of their student. What it does is it provides the Federal Department of Education with an understanding of that family's circumstance, so that the student's financial aid eligibility can be evaluated. I would venture to say we want to encourage our families to do the process. I would never make a promise that they would be eligible for gift aid, but we're unable to make that determination if a student is a dependent student without parental information. There are some times when a parent has ultimately refused to provide any information on the FAFSA. With that parental refusal, there are a few things that can happen. There are times when a student can qualify for just unsubsidized loans as a result of the parental refusal. In the case that a student has a unique unusual circumstance, and is unable to get parental information because of that unusual circumstance. When they are submitting the FAFSA, there is a question currently that asks them if they're experiencing any of those unusual circumstances. And when that question is answered yes, then the onus is on the post-secondary institution to reach out to that student, so that student then understands the unusual circumstance process at that school for dependency overrides. And so that is what we're referring to in financial aid as a provisional independent status. It does require additional supporting documentation to outline some of those unique circumstances that I shared earlier in the presentation, everything from abandonment, abuse, or neglect. There are other situations, a deceased parent with an incarcerated parent. There are a variety of different unique, unusual circumstances that may be considered. I hope that answered the question.
Yes. Thank you. So I see one we have in the chat that one of our volunteers said has come up a lot recently. If a student submits the FAFSA and did not answer the dependency questions right, so it deemed him as independent, but it's wrong, how can he fix this so the parent can now be contributor on FAFSA?
Sure. So I actually had one of those at my FAFSA night. The student will eventually be able to go out and make corrections. I will tell you, in the current state, we are having some challenges with students being able to log in and make corrections to the FAFSA if they made an error. Those corrections should become available in due time. The Federal Department of Education has that running list of known challenges and the resolution of those challenges. And any of the financial aid administrators on the call, I last checked, I think either yesterday or Monday, I did not see that that was resolved as yet. Has anybody seen that resolved?
It has not been resolved.
Okay.
And from what I understand, the corrections for students won't be available until the FAFSAs have been processed and released. So we will have that to look forward to sometime in March, I believe, unless something changes in the meantime.
Right. Thank you, Damien.
And while Adriana's looking for the next question, I do want to add that this is an unusual year, and all of our schools are going to be working as quickly as possible to get financial aid award offers out to students with the compressed timeline that we're going to be under. So as your students and families are talking and asking those questions, you can reassure them that they will be receiving that information as soon as schools are able to, because I can tell you from personal experience, we have no desire to be waiting. We would normally be
Absolutely.
deep into this process, and for some schools, those offers would have already been out. So it would just be a little bit more time, and we appreciate the patience on their side as well, because we're all navigating this as ourselves for the first time.
Definitely. So I guess along the same note with corrections, what are some things that students and parents can avoid? What are some common mistakes when completing the FAFSA, just so they don't get behind in the process and have to go back and make any corrections?
I think one of the keys is to actually simply read the question in its entirety. I think sometimes when students and families are a little bit anxious as they're going through the process, they misread the question, or they just kind of skim the question, and then they answer it in a way that they didn't intend, and without them being able to make the corrections. This is the year that they definitely want to make sure that they're answering the questions how they intend to answer the questions. I think some of the challenges that we've had in the past will be mitigated with the consent being granted, because we're going to be getting that information directly from the IRS. So that's going to minimize some of the errors that we may have gotten in the past with some of the financial information. So I think that that's going to be a benefit to students and families. So right now, I think what's most important, because the FAFSA is a truncated version of what we used to see in the past, it is not as long as it once was, is to just ensure that as they are reading the questions, they are answering the questions with intentionality and answering the question that is being asked.
Wonderful. Along with that, who can they reach out if they have any questions, the students or the parents, especially if they have issues logging in? Some may say that their social security is already in use for the FSA ID, but it hasn't been. So what are some ways around that?
So they're going to contact the Federal Student Aid, and that is 1-800-4FED-AID. And that is the number that they will call in order to resolve any challenges that they're having with FSA ID access, FAFSA submission. That is the number to call. I will be transparent in that what I'm hearing is that there is an elongated hold process at this time as a result of many students and families needing assistance in navigating the process.
Well, thank you for that. Because a lot of questions are just coming through of how to do the process and what's the best way to get the best information from who.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one.
No, I was just responding, just saying that in general, they're asking who's the best person to reach out to, and where to get the information. So that's definitely helpful to know. Can you also touch on, you mentioned this earlier, how students, if they have to complete the summer FAFSA, they may be completing a different FAFSA from the one in the fall. What's the best way counselors can kind of advise on that and prepare their students that they may be seeing two different FAFSAs when they're going into that?
Sure. So I would say any student who anticipates starting at a post-secondary institution in the summer term should probably start with that school's website. Normally, we do have a section on summer aid to determine what aid year the summer is a part of. For some schools, summer is what we refer to in financial aid as a header, meaning it begins the aid year. For many schools, summer is what we refer to as a trailer, meaning it ends the aid year. So for example, if summer is a trailer, then summer is a part of the year that is ending. So for us at UCF and for many of our partners on the call, summer is a part of the 23-24 year this year. And so if a student is starting in our summer term, that student would need to do the 23-24 FAFSA to be considered for federally funded and institutional aid here at UCF. So they would then do the 24-25 FAFSA for fall 24-25, spring 25, summer 25. So it's important for the student to just find out how summer lands at that particular school. And if you want to err on the side of caution, doing both FAFSAs would be no harm, no foul. If summer is not a trailer at that institution, it just wouldn't be utilized.
Okay. I think we have time for a few more questions before we wrap things up.
And I think
So
I
I-
see someone asking about the number. It's 1-800-4FED-AID.
Yes.
So the number 4 FEDAID.
Okay, one more question about parents in the FSA ID. If they did previously have an FSA ID from years ago and can't remember their information, they can't log back in, what's the best way to go about that? Would they also contact the number? What's the best way?
There is a reset that they can, if it's still associated with an email address, they can do a password reset on the FSA ID page when they're there. And it will go to the email or the cell phone number associated with the FSA ID for verification, and they can then move forward with that. If they are having challenges resetting the FSA ID, then I would venture to say the next step would be to contact the same number that I shared earlier to see what they need to do in order to get their FSA ID fully established again.
So I think we have time for one more question. Just in general, what is the best resource for students, parents, counselors to kind of go to get answers to their questions? Any specific handouts that you may refer to that would be the best? I know Damien sent over some that we will also be adding to the email to you guys, so you can have those handouts as well, but anything in particular that stands out to you as well?
I often send students and families to studentaid.gov. Studentaid.gov is Federal Student Aid's official website. This is where you're going to find information about the FAFSA process, federal aid, loan repayment. All that information is housed on the studentaid.gov website. So I would say if there was one resource that I would share outwardly, it would be studentaid.gov. That's where you're going to find comprehensive information about the federal financial aid process.
Wonderful. And I will add this in the chat as well. We have a FAFSA walkthrough coming up that Karima will also be back for. So this is a step-by-step walkthrough of the FAFSA. You'll see screen by screen what it looks like when a student is completing the FAFSA. So you can encourage your students and families to join this session on February 20th. And then they can also get their questions answered by FAFSA representatives on the line as well. So that's a great resource. We will be sending this out, and then also a few handouts that we'll have that you guys can also access. But thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you, Karima and Damien. And definitely useful information for this school year that counselors will definitely need to support their students. So watch out for the information coming within a week or so, and it'll also be on FCAN's website. Thank you so much for joining us.